Hello, this is a TradeSight market preview for Friday, May 17th, 2013, powered by eSignal Charts. Here's a look at the daily S&P 500 index chart. Had basically an inside day today. We'll show you what the intraday action looked like in a few moments. But basically an inside day on heavy volume, 1.85 billion NASDAQ shares. That's one of the best volume days of a while. Not usually good when you trade heavy volume and can't continue to make progress, but we'll see what that leads to. The reality is that tomorrow is options expiration. Typically a fairly flat session as stocks are pegged to their nearby strike prices already. So you're going to get some volume early and then things will drift off. Second half of the day probably pretty flat and not really tradable. That's typical. Obviously anything can happen. Here's a look at the NASDAQ 100 index. Swept a new high and came back down in the session today. So we're now 11 bars up on our Comer count on the NASDAQ 100 index, trying to get that exhaustion sell signal. We're getting close for sure. Need to get to a 13 there. We have a couple of minor data points tomorrow morning. We've got the Michigan sentiment data due at 9:55 a.m. Eastern time, and we've got the leading indicators data at 10 a.m. Eastern time. Neither of those are huge numbers for the market. Nothing is pre-market. Again, I would expect to see a lot of volume in the first hour. Here's a look at the semiconductor index. Also swept the highest today and came back. And then the biotech index, which has rolled over here a bit. Remember when biotechs and banks tend to lead the market. So sharper rollover in the biotechs than anything else. Also stocks that have had some excitement of late. Here's a look at Apple. Had a pretty good rollover the last few days, 40 points this week, and then bounced on a piece of that back today on Thursday. But still obviously in a general downtrend. And Google, which had their developers conference this week, gapped up. It does have a 13 sell signal in place from the Comer right up here, and you can see the pink risk line way up around 945 from that sell signal. So there's a lot of room between the current price and the sell. To get the confirmed sell, you'd really like to see it break under the 10 EMA on that chart. Let's take a quick look just to show you what the intraday action looked like on the S&P, or the futures anyways. This is the S&P E-mini contract. You can see that we had a very flat action early on in the session. Only traded in about a 5-pip range until the last half hour of the day. We're inside the value areas. That's the shaded area right here. Got up near the value area high and had a 9-bar setup phase for a little minor sell warning up there, and then drifted back down to the red static trend line of that move. Got a 9-bar move to the downside. Used that area as support, basically caught in a 2.5 point range over lunch. Very choppy, as you can see these tails early on. One big tail up and back down. Not really a tradable environment. The blue line here is the pivot. We did open right around that level. We left no gap behind today. We gapped down slightly and filled it very early on, and it really was only in the last 45 minutes, maybe the last hour, where we started to head lower and then broke the lows with 30 minutes left and drifted a little bit beyond that. But even with that move, we were still inside all of the action of the prior session. So the majority of the day, even though there was heavy volume, no progress made, stuck along the pivot inside the value area, and then a little sell-off late in the day. We'll see if that becomes meaningful tomorrow or if it's just options unraveling, since we didn't really see our typical options unraveling move this week. We did get a push up on Wednesday, but it was late in the session. Technically speaking, it could have been the options unraveling move, but it did not start 1 hour into the session as they usually do. And then we got a little sell-off here. So maybe there's sort of some dual action options unraveling going on, but it's done now, which means Friday, typically light. That's it. We'll be in the trading lab calling it as we see it. Everybody have a great weekend.